So yesterday, the NDP released the numbers for how many members it has and how many it's gained since the leadership race started to pick up steam in March. The party now sits at around triple the members it had back in March, with around 124,000 members in total, up from 41,000. In other words, about 83,000 new members joined. This may sound like a huge boost, but to put things into a bit better context, this is actually 4,000 less people than the party had eligible to vote in the last leadership election in 2012, and only about half as many people as the Conservatives had eligible to vote in their leadership election back in May. Still, this number is nothing to scoff at. The NDP was very high profile back in 2012, as Jack Layton had just recently passed away, and the party was the official opposition in Ottawa for the first time ever. But this alone isn't really much to talk about. Lucky for us, not too long after the party's numbers were released, Jagmeet Singh began tweeting out his campaign's own numbers, and oh boy has he contributed. More than half of the new signups were done through Jagmeet's campaign. Jagmeet signed up more than 47,000 new members to the NDP. To look at this in a little better depth, let's look at the provincial breakdown Jagmeet's campaign provided. More than 57% of all members of the NDP in Ontario joined through his campaign. Around a third of all members in BC and Alberta joined through him. Around a fifth of all members in Manitoba and Quebec joined through Jagmeet's campaign. Around half of all Ontario NDP members are people he signed up just in the GTA. Hold on a second. That's almost all of his Ontario signups, all just from the GTA. That's something you start to notice about these posts. They brag about bringing in a lot of people from what he calls riding dense areas, which is a very interesting way to spin major cities. To be clear, I'm not knocking him on this. The fact is, these are areas where the NDP can do very well, where a lot of gains can be made by pointing out the lack of progressive leadership coming from the Liberals. But it does make you start to wonder if that's the extent of his appeal, just taking away from the Liberals in large population centres. Which is why it was rather convenient that yesterday he also announced that he's gotten the endorsement of UFCW, a major union here in Canada. With this, he bolsters his image as someone who can speak to the working class with credibility and gain their support. As such, it was a very smart move to announce this on the same day as he'd release numbers that may bring that into question. Things are looking very good for Jagmeet, I have to say, which is why I feel it's important to bring up the issues I have with him now. Similar to Nikki Ashton, he's not been very strong on electoral reform, an issue that's very dear to my heart. He's the only candidate who hasn't outright stated that if they achieve government in 2019, they would introduce legislation to change our voting system away from first past the post. Worse still, he also has the weakest rhetoric on negotiating for electoral reform in a minority government balance of power situation. Every other candidate says it would be a requirement for a confidence and supply agreement, while Jagmeet says he would simply fight for it, not necessarily that he'd have it as a non-negotiable requirement for such an agreement. But I'll be fair to him. When the issue has been brought up in debates, he's sounded more sincere than Nikki Ashton, and even sincere enough to convince me that on some level he legitimately cares about the issue. Still, without a real proposal, I can't say that he's better than she is on the issue, because as weak as her proposal is, it at least exists, while his doesn't. The other issue I have with Jagmeet is how he presents himself. For starters, in debates, it's almost disturbing how often he uses the phrase, "this offends me." While he does use it in reference to real problems that need to be addressed, the fact that it's a thing he commonly says doesn't bode well for us, when lefties already have a reputation as being perpetually offended by meaningless crap. He's also, in a lot of ways, similar to Justin Trudeau, in that, in a lot of ways, he comes off as being style over substance. While Nikki Ashton has a message of building a movement for left-wing activism to bring social, environmental, and economic justice for all, and Guy Caron has brought a message of addressing poverty through a basic income system to begin the transition to a more fair, greener economy, Jagmeet's slogan is, "with love and courage." That's not to say he doesn't have some really solid policy proposals. He absolutely does. But that doesn't change that his campaign seems very centered around empty platitudes and questionable identity politics. Furthermore, there's the air of arrogance around certain comments, such as how at the most recent debate, when asked once again if he would seek a federal seat in Parliament, even if he lost the leadership race, he answered back with, Respectfully, I won't lose. Of course, bringing this back to the numbers, if we take them at face value, it seems like he has a solid justification for saying that. Again, at least a third of current NDP members were signed up through his campaign. And when you look at the breakdown he provided on Twitter going over how he managed it, it's not surprising that he managed to sign up as many people as he did. But not only that, it's hard not to be impressed by just how much has gone into this effort. With 73 core organizers, Jagmeet has been able to establish more than 1,100 of what his campaign refers to as growth captains, working alongside a total of 3,200 volunteers. That's a lot of manpower going into growing the party in a very grassroots way. But that doesn't mean all these people necessarily support him either. For all we know, there could have been a significant chunk of those people who were just general NDP supporters, but his campaign reached out to them first, so they signed up through him even without necessarily supporting him. It's also possible that people who did join as supporters of his could change their minds after seeing what other candidates are bringing to the table. Until polling is done with updated membership lists, we simply have no way of knowing what his impact really is and how much of a chance he really has to win. As a Caron supporter myself, I'm not concerned that my preferred candidate has no chance just based on these numbers. They may not mean as much as we think they do in the long run. And even if they do, that's still only a third of members, and a lot of supporters of all the other candidates are leaning towards Guy as their second choice. So I still think that Guy has a real chance to win as long as he survives the first ballot. Still, I have to congratulate the Singh campaign, as it appears to have done some incredible work in terms of bringing in members and just doing general outreach. And even if Jagmeet doesn't become the next leader, the machine he set up for this race will be an important tool for the NDP in 2019, so I hope he continues to have some sort of federal influence, regardless of if he wins or not.